Well, hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do part 2 of my 3K Q&A. If you are unfamiliar, the idea behind this is that Kristen Ann had asked me if I would celebrate hitting 3,000 subscribers by doing a Q&A, and I agreed to do it. So I will link part 1 down below with the first batch of questions, and we will get going on part 2 momentarily. I want to thank everyone again who has submitted questions. I will put the link to the announcement video down below if you have a question that you want to add, because I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing we're gonna need to go into a part 3 and perhaps even a part 4. Click the link to that announcement video and add your question to that list. That way I only have to look in one place for questions and it'll just keep things easy for me. So thank you in advance for that. And if you have already submitted a question, thank you. I am going to be getting to all of them. I asked in my last video kind of if people wanted the more chatty version of the Q&A or if I should just kind of keep it brief and run through the questions quickly, and consensus seems to be keep it chatty. So I think that means it'll take a little bit longer to get through, but hopefully it'll be interesting and fun for you, and we'll see how that goes. Let's get to the first question for this video, which is from Hannah's Books. Since I am reading some Faulkner right now, I would love to hear about any favorite Southern writers you have. Well, shout out to Faulkner in August, which I believe is why she was reading Faulkner at that time. And I participated in that last year, but did not actually finish the Faulkner book I was reading until September, maybe even October. And that was the first Faulkner book I had read. I had only read a short story of his before, and he's an author I would like to read more of. Southern literature is a bit of a blind spot for me, and it's hard because I do love To Kill a Mockingbird, but it's the only book Harper Lee wrote. I pretend to Ghost at a Watchman didn't happen, basically. So I feel like I can't point to a writer who only released one book that I acknowledge, at least. But there are authors who I own books by. Well, I want to read more Faulkner. The only one I own is the one that I've read. I used to own others, but lost them somewhere along the way, and there are definitely more that I want to read. I own books by Zora Neale Hurston, Flannery O'Connor, Eudora Welty, and Carson McCullers, and have not gotten around to reading them, and they are all people on my TBR that I really, really want to read. So it's hard because I can't really point to a favorite Southern writer. It's something that I need to spend more time on discovering and figuring out for myself, but those are some places I am looking to start. And if you have recommendations for Southern writers, I would love to hear them. That would help me out a lot. So leave them in the comments down below. Question number 2 from Jacob. What is your favorite book by a Canadian author? And then he has other questions, but let's answer that one first. It's probably The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, followed closely by All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Toews. I love All My Puny Sorrows. I have wanted to reread Handmaid's Tale for a long time, and now with it being so popular and having a TV show and a sequel, I've kind of put it off. Usually as soon as something becomes popular, I feel like it doesn't need my attention, oddly, or I can circle back around to it. Oddly, Faulkner comes into that as well, because I had decided 15 years ago, I think, that I was going to give myself a summer project and read 3 books by William Faulkner. And almost immediately, Oprah, and this is when she was doing classics for her book club, she announced that she was doing 3 books for her book club, and they were a summer reading project, and they were all books by William Faulkner, and they were exactly the 3 books that I had picked. And I immediately thought, I can't read these right now because everybody's going to think I'm only doing it because Oprah told me to, and I didn't do it, and I never caught up to the books either. So that's Greg logic. So part of me wants to reread The Handmaid's Tale to see if it is definitively my favorite, but it's probably going to be a while before I get around to that, and it feels like a popular choice right now, which makes it obvious and a little bit cliched, and that makes me want to say All My Puny Sorrows, but the reality is, at the end of the day, I really did like The Handmaid's Tale a lot, so it probably is The Handmaid's Tale, and I'll go with that. But All My Puny Sorrows is up there. I really love that book a lot, and if you haven't read it, please do. It is it is a book that is sad and funny at the same time, and it's about sisterhood and family and life and death and love and the lengths you are willing to go to for someone you love. I love it. It's really good. Jacob's other questions. Do you watch TV or movies or listen to music? What genres of these are your favorites or least favorites? I do. I do watch TV. I watch movies a lot. What genres? Somebody asked later about favorite movies and TV shows, so I'll leave favorites in those since you kind of most specifically talk about genres. We'll get to my favorites later, but or hopefully in this video if it doesn't get too long. Genres, I tend to like comedies and drama. It's kind of a mix. I like comedies, I like dramas, and I tend to get suckered in by British things every once in a while. I do like a mystery, like a crime thriller and things like that. And so, but again, there's kind of a mix, and I can be picky about sitcoms as well. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting blend. Movies, it tend to be the same. Sometimes the ones that I watch the most are more in the comedy realm, because especially in years like this, you need that kind of escapist humor. But I do really like dramas, and I like things that make you think. So that works for me. Least favorites, in terms of genres or TV shows. I mean, there are a lot of TV shows I've kind of actively resisted getting into. Like, I never have been interested in Game of Thrones. Sorry, I know it's a popular show. I've never been interested in The Walking Dead, or anything like that. I've never seen an episode of Breaking Bad. I've only seen one episode of The Sopranos. I think there is kind of a through line in those that you could pick out and discern for yourself. They're very kind of male-centric, violent shows, so I just don't really respond to those at all. And I do think that there's a tendency for TV shows to run for too long. I think a lot of TV shows should be happy with a limited run, like Lost. The first season of Lost, I think, was fantastic, and then it just kept getting more complicated and convoluted, and it really should have been 2 or 3 seasons and then done. But it just kept going, and I lost interest and stopped. And I think, like Bates Motel, I think the first season was really interesting, and then in order to keep going, it kept getting more convoluted and weird. So I think a lot of TV shows should have an exit strategy and stick to it and not try to stay around for a really long time. That any show that does that is probably going to be a weak link for me. And if I had to make a YouTube channel about something other than books, what would it be about? Movies, hands down. Absolutely movies. I have even thought about opening a different YouTube channel to talk about movies, but it's hard to keep up with just the one. And I've thought about talking about movies on this channel more, but I feel like I should stick to the topic a little bit. So that's why I mentioned in my last Q&A video that I think the thing for me is to try to stick to the things that find a balance between things that people who watch the videos find interesting and stick to things that I find interesting as well. Like I do occasionally do book to screen adaptation comparisons, and they don't really get a lot of views, but I find that interesting, so I keep doing things like that. So it's kind of my way of incorporating movies into this channel anyway, just a little bit. So that finishes Jacob's questions. CJ Reed said, what are your top 5 favorite channels? And I had told myself that I was going to try to answer every question that somebody submitted, but I think this one I'm going to take a bit of a pass on, because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings by leaving them out of a top 5. And honestly, I go to different channels depending on what my mood is in that moment. So, and I tend to fall behind on a lot of channels, and I will spend like a day catching up on one person's channels, and that's usually a lovely thing, but it's a rotating cast of channels and people and personalities. And I also try to make sure I spend time looking for new channels, and so I don't think there's really like a favorite 5 anyway. But even if there were, I don't think I would really want to say, just because I enjoy a lot of channels for different reasons, and I wouldn't want to make anybody feel excluded if they didn't make the list. I hope that makes sense. So, but thank you for the question. Danika Brielle asked a couple of questions, and let's deal with them in order like we did for Jacob. The first one was, how did you and your husband meet? We joked that we met the old-fashioned way. We met in a coffee shop in New York City, and it is one of those stories where if you want to believe in fate, it's a good example for you, because neither one of us was supposed to be in that coffee shop that night. My husband's version of it is short. He had a friend who kept trying to set him up on a blind date, and he did not want to go on the blind date for like a year. And finally he was like, okay, if it'll make you shut up about this, just set it up, fine. So he had agreed to a blind date, and then the person, after all that, a year of him not wanting to go on the date, the person stood him up. So he stopped into a coffee shop to charge his phone. I was supposed to be out of the country. I was supposed to be in the Caribbean for a month and ended up only there for a week. And there's a whole long story on why the trip got cut short, but I'm gonna leave that out and just say that I was really tired. I had spent like 24 hours in and out of airports getting home from the Caribbean, but I had left my laptop at a friend's apartment before I left, and I went to pick it up, and it's funny because it's been 10 years and not that much time, but still a lot of people in my family at that point didn't really have social media. So I needed to send a bunch of emails to let people know that I was home and safe and alive, because somebody had started a rumor that I was injured. There was a boat accident, basically, but that's, again, a whole other story. So I had to email a bunch of people to reach, and I figured, you know what, if I do the emails now, I can just go home and sleep tomorrow. So I walked into a coffee shop, and my future husband was right there, and we immediately locked eyes and then we just sat and flirted with each other for an hour before he finally came over to say hello. And we chatted for a while, and I ended up not sleeping the next day because when I was ready to leave, I got his phone number, and we agreed to meet again for coffee the following day, and everything went from there, and it was lovely. Question number 2 from Danika Brielle is, I think I remember you saying your dad came out later in life. If so, I wonder how he handled first learning that you were gay, and if it played a role at all in embracing it himself. Also, how the family reacted when he did. Was there shock, anger, happiness, excitement? Probably overly interested because, I don't want to share Danika's personal life with everybody, but she goes into talk about kind of why she was interested. And I love the stories. So thank you, Danika, for sharing if you're watching this. So my father, yes, he came out shortly. My parents divorced when I was 10. So somewhere around 1992. My father was born in 1950, so he was 42 at the time. So yes, he came out later. And he came out almost immediately after the divorce and told us about a year later. And I think for him, when he came out, from my perspective, I made sense to myself and kind of knew that I was gay, but I hid it for a long time. And it took over 10 years for me to really come to terms with it and be comfortable with it and come out myself. And in the meantime, I think my father, we do have a lot in common. So he knew, basically. He definitely knew what was going on with me and where I fit into that whole story. So, but because of his experience and his coming out later in life, I think it gave him a little bit of patience, but it also gave him a little bit of wisdom, so he could kind of nudge me in the right direction. And occasionally, when it got later and I was still being stubborn, he could kind of knowingly look at me and be like, Greg, come on. Which was kind of nice and kind of what I needed. So there was like a push and a pull there. I think he definitely understood, but he didn't try to like force the issue because he knew that he had needed time to come to terms with it. So he gave me the leeway, but also put in a good foundation so that when I was ready, it was there and I could be comfortable. And that was really nice. The family reacted, his family was pretty okay with it, actually. My mother's family was very shocked and did not react great. Didn't react badly either, but there were some things said. And I think part of that reaction is what ended up making it more difficult for me to eventually come out, because I saw the way they reacted to him and thought, oh no, what are they going to think about me? But the benefit over time was that because they had to deal with the shock of him coming out, again, it created a foundation for me. So when I came out, it wasn't as much of a big deal. And I think people knew, again. So it ended up not being as much of a big deal because they had already gone through it with my father. He kind of paved a path for me. So it's interesting because people tend to think because I had a gay father, it must have been easier for me to come out. And in some ways, it certainly absolutely was. But in other ways, it was more difficult. But the ways it was more difficult were entirely of my own creation, which is interesting. You know, I think we are the best at setting up roadblocks for ourselves, and I definitely did that. So, yeah, it was an interesting thing, and I think my sisters and I were actually surprisingly okay with it when he came out. And of course, in hindsight, there are a lot of things that should have given it away, but especially in the 80s and the early 90s, you weren't really looking for signs like that, and it's certainly not about your father. You just kind of assumed that people were heterosexual, and that was it. So, but in hindsight, yeah, there are a lot of giveaways that we could have picked up on. But yeah, we were largely fine. After the divorce, we really just wanted him to be happy. So when he told us, I mean, there was an adjustment period. I was happy for him, but I still loved him. But I also really wanted other people to not know. I was very concerned about that. So there was a journey on that as well. And actually, long term, I think I am better off because of all of the things that I was exposed to during his coming out, and it made me a more open person long term, and it gave me a better sense of like the history of who I am and what people like me have been through, because I learned about them when I was still young. You know, you don't get taught things like gay history in school, or you didn't when I was a kid. And because I was around my father and would learn that, you know, we would shop in the Castro when we lived in San Francisco, and I learned a lot about the culture and the people and the history that I would not have learned any other way until I have no way of understanding what it's like for somebody to come out and then try to figure out what gay culture is like, because I already knew it, and that gave me a big advantage as well. And the families are, you know, they're weird, they're ever changing, and frequently wonderful, as I'm sure you, Danika, have no doubt experienced, and many other people have experienced. So I think, and it's interesting because I think of my mother's mother, my grandmother, and the thing, she's in her 90s now, and all the changes that she's been through in her life. She had an arranged marriage. She immigrated to the United States from Italy as a young child. She was only 4, I think, when they came over on the boat, and it was just impossible for them to even think about her not marrying someone who's Italian. So they arranged a marriage for someone back in Italy who had wanted to move, was known to the family, and wanted to move to the United States. So that's how she did it. They tried to do the same thing to my mother, and my mother refused, and she ended up marrying someone who was not Italian, which was a scandal at the time. And then none of my mother's siblings, she was the oldest, ended up marrying Italian people, and it was fine. My uncle dated a black woman, and that was a huge scandal with my grandmother for a time, but then she actually really liked the woman, so she kind of came around on that. They ultimately broke up, but still, you know, it was something that she came to accept over time. And then I know there was concern when I was out and gay that it was going to be a big deal for her. Like Christmas Eve, I was bringing my husband Joel to meet my family for the first time, and my aunt, who was hosting, texted me to ask me, actually she left me a voicemail saying, hey, I just, you know, wanted to check in because grandma's going to be here and she's going to meet, so I was thinking maybe we should introduce Joel as your friend. But I don't want you to be uncomfortable, so let me know what you think. And before I could even call her back, my mother called me and was like, absolutely not. We are not introducing Joel as your friend. Your grandmother is going to deal with it. If she has a problem, we'll deal with it, and it'll be fine, which is one of the best things my mother has ever done. And I don't think my aunt was trying to be... She was trying to make everybody comfortable. She wasn't necessarily trying to censor anything. So I have understanding for what she was doing there too. But then when Joel and I arrived, at her house at the party. We were saying hello to everybody, and my grandmother was in the kitchen, so we went in, and I said, "Hey, Grandma, this is my boyfriend Joel," and she just said, "Oh, okay. Joel, do you want some fennel?" Neither Joel nor I like fennel, but he took it. But it's just, I think about family as a kind of journey, and all the changes that she accepted in her life, and that she has a Trump voter now, and that hurts. But you know, there have been a lot of positive evolutions in her life anyway, and all that just to illustrate that family changes so much over time, and it can, in ways that are wonderful and in ways that are frustrating as well. And my family has certainly done that as well. Here we go. Danika also asks about favorite movies and or TV shows, if I watch any. So here you go to the other question as well. All right. So my favorite movies are Amadeus, Cabaret, Moonstruck, and The Devil Wears Prada. And All About Eve is up there as well. It's a very gay list. Amadeus, I need to rewatch it. I used to watch it all the time. I know I had seen it as a kid, and all I remember is being really creeped out by what I thought at the time was a ghost. But now, of course, I understand was Salieri trying to deliberately mess with Mozart's mind by pretending to be the ghost of his father. And I think it's just a beautiful movie. It's a beautifully made movie. It says a lot about art and religion and competition and jealousy. I really enjoyed it. And F. Murray Abraham is a delight in that movie. Cabaret has really great music, really great performances. It says a lot about deliberately being blind to things that are going on in the world, and the importance of it's kind of a bleak movie when you really think about all of the stuff happening underneath the surface of it, but it's also a beautiful movie, and there are some really shocking moments in it, and I just love it. It's another movie I need to rewatch. I haven't watched Amadeus or Cabaret in a while, and I used to watch them all the time. And Moonstruck is a movie, God, my family we used to watch that movie all the time, and because my mother's family is all Italian, I can really relate to that movie very well. And I could point to each character in the movie and name a relative who would be that person's correlation in real life, which says a lot. And The Devil Wears Prada, I just love. It's just such a good movie. I love it. And All About Eve, again, really just great, well-made movie. I would actually say The Royal Tenenbaums is up there as well, because I love complicated family movies, and it reminds me of my family in some key ways. Obviously not, because it's a very exaggerated family in that movie. But yeah, I love The Royal Tenenbaums as well. I would put that up there. My favorite TV show is The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Without a doubt, I love it. I think I often joke that the great conflict in my life is that I want to be Mary Richards, but I am Rhoda. And I've grown to be okay with that. I used to be devastated by that notion, because I want to be that really optimistic, cheerful, happy person. And in some ways I am. But at heart, I'm kind of the cynical New Yorker who's a little bit out of shape these days. But, and I've grown to make peace with it. It's like, I want to be Mary Richards, but I'm Rhoda. If I were a Golden Girl, I'd be Dorothy. It's just the way my life is, and that's fine. Somebody's got to be Rhoda, somebody's got to be Dorothy, and it's me. My other favorite TV shows would be 30 Rock, Frasier, and The Great British Bake Off, for sure. We rewatched Frasier recently, and I think it is one of those shows that it's interesting watching older shows, because you used to watch them spaced out by a week, and if you watch them back to back to back, you start to notice similarities. Like, so many episodes on Frasier have the same basic structure or premise, and if you watch them back to back to back, you really start picking up on that. But it still holds up as a show. 30 Rock, oh my God, I love that show so much. It's probably the show that I quote the most, and The Great British Bake Off just makes me happy. It's my comfort food in TV show form, and I love it. I love it. Danika's final question is, any good old Hollywood film recommendations for a newbie? That is tough, because but even when I worked at Borders, I always wanted to know what somebody likes before giving them recommendations. So without knowing what kind of movies you'd be interested in, it's not really easy to just say this is where you should start. I'd say I think it's safe to start with some popular movies first that appeal to you, and then spread out from there, because it's once you start watching some of the popular movies, you can zero in on some of the things that you're interested in and would like to explore more. Like Hitchcock would probably be a great place to start, especially if you like thrillers. And if you like particularly bookish things, you could start with his movie Rebecca, which is a great movie, and from what I've heard, a great book. I haven't read the book. But if you like Rebecca, you could explore more Hitchcock movies. You could, if you like the performances, you can look for more movies with, I think Joan Fontaine is the lead. She has some other great movies. Laurence Olivier, of course, has some other great movies. And you could do it that way. If musicals appeal to you, check out some of the old classics like The Sound of Music, or West Side Story, Singing in the Rain, things like that. And again, if you like Singing in the Rain, try more Gene Kelly movies. Gene Kelly is a very attractive man. Apparently wasn't nice in person, but he was very attractive. So, you could just look at some of the more popular movies that fit a genre that you like, and then try to use them as tools for discovery and other avenues to follow. If you have Disney Plus, old Disney movies could be a good entry point, and just, again, follow them and figure out where to go, what things you're interested in, following from there. Or you could just pick a list, like the AFI's Top 100 Movies, or just the list of movies that have won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, and go through at your own pace and pick out which ones you like. And that would probably be a good way of doing that as well. So I know that's not a really specific recommendation, but if any of those paths sound appealing to you, I would follow one and go from there. Tynan or Thenan, I don't know which way to pronounce it, I'm sorry, and I hope one of those was correct, says, are any of your IRL friends or family bookish? What do your friends and family who know you outside of Booktube think of your Booktube channel? Most of my family is not particularly bookish. It's really just me. My father's mother apparently really loved to read, so that's probably where I get it from. My older sister actually loves to read and is good at it. She was in AP English classes. Although she's one of those people who's good at everything, so it's tempting to hate her for being good at everything. But she's just such a good person that you can't. So anyway, she's really good at it. She just doesn't have the passion to follow it as much as I do. But it's really, for the most part, it's really just me. As I discussed in the last video, it's kind of why I really wanted to start a channel, because I wanted that avenue to talk about books and keep bookish conversations in my life, and I don't really get that from my family. They all respect that I do, but I do read, but they're not as passionate about it as I am, which is fine. It's fair. Not too many of them know that I have a Booktube channel. As I discussed in the last video, I tend to be really insecure about these things, and there's that push and pull between, I don't really want to tell people I'm starting a Booktube channel when I do, because I want to make sure I'm actually going to stick with it before I make a big deal of it. But then once you've started it, it feels weird to go back and be like, oh, by the way, this is a thing I do now, because inevitably you're going to be like, how long have you been doing this? Why didn't you tell me? And you fall into that trap. So not too many of them know. But they know I really like to talk about books and always look for avenues to talk about books. So the ones who do know kind of just like, oh, cool, that's cool, good for you, that's great. And that's pretty much it. Matthew Sharapa asks, what is the first toiletry you steal when staying at a hotel? That is a really interesting question. He has two other questions, but let's start with that. I'm actually most likely to steal the sewing kit as a kind of just in case measure. Of the actual toiletries, I'd probably steal the lotion before anything else. I never really like the shampoo or conditioner that you get in hotels. Maybe the soap, but again, I tend to like the soap that I have on hand better, and same with the shampoo and the conditioner. So if an actual toiletry, the lotion, but it's the sewing kit that I'm most likely to take. And again, I don't know how to sew, so I don't know what I would do with it, but needles tend to come in handy. So it seems like a good thing to have on hand, just in case. So that would be the thing I would be most likely to take. What type of flower makes for the best bouquet? My favorite flowers are peonies, so I am going to go with that. I know that is probably the gayest answer ever. So be it. I don't care. It is what it is. That's my favorite flower, so that's what it is. I think they make the best bouquet. Actually, my sister, when she got married, her bouquet was made of peonies, and it is absolutely one of the bar none, the most beautiful wedding bouquet I have ever seen. It was amazing. She let it dry out. She had it for many years. I don't think she does anymore, but it even looked beautiful dried out. Yeah, peonies. They are my favorite. And Matthew Sharapa's final question is, what is the worst book Booktube made you read? Well, taking this literally, I read Where Reasons End for the Booktube prize, and I really, it's aggressively not a me book. I can see why somebody would like it, but it's really just not for me, and I did not like it. So if we're taking that literally, then that. But outside of that, the book that Booktube really bumped up my TBR and made me feel like I had to read it was The Song of Achilles, when I really did not like it. Please don't at me. I just really didn't like it. Sorry, not sorry. Marie, I think I see what you did there. I like it. Says, what is your story about reading? How did you start? Some of my earliest memories are my parents reading to me, and I was always really fascinated by the stories and the pictures before I learned to read myself. And then as I learned to read, I was really fascinated that I could then take them and enjoy them anytime that I wanted. And it just always captivated me, and I loved the stories. Like some of the earliest books that they read to me, like the Owl and the Pussycat, just captivated me. And I always loved the ending of the Owl and the Pussycat. And hand in hand on the edge of the sand, they danced by the light of the moon. The moon, they danced by the light of the moon. It just captured me. So it's probably no surprise. And I think that's my origin story. My parents would read to me, and I was fascinated by it and the books that they would read. And I those are. You know that my family we have a lot of good memories, but there were also a lot of really tough times and crazy things that happened. So those are some of my fondest memories. And my father used to, even as we got older, my father would read to my sisters and I always looked forward to that very much. And then I loved the feeling of accomplishment that I got from reading, and people were always impressed that I was a reader, and I loved that too as a child. So it felt like something I was good at. And I think Matilda is the book that kind of weaponized me as a reader, because I loved it so much, and it made me really escalate and read more. And then I remember the day I had been reading like a lot of Berenstain Bears books, and I remember telling my mother, I'm a little bored of these. And Mom looked at me and said, okay, well, I think that means you're ready for a challenge, so let's go to the library. And she took me to the library, and she introduced me to the Hardy Boys books, and I had such a fun time picking them out. And I think there was something about the idea that it was a series, and there were so many of them, and all the different plots, and you could pick and choose of them. I was fascinated, and I just that is my reading origin story. And I think it's a lot of it is probably nature, because my sisters had the same experience with my parents reading to them, and they didn't carry reading through. So there's something in me that really responded to it. But it is also that my parents made reading so accessible to me, and they supported it, and the other people around me gave me praise for being a reader. Like I started checking out adult books from the library when I was in like 2nd or 3rd grade. I don't think I really understood them all that well, but I kept doing it, and because of that, I kept getting it better as a reader, and then I could impress people more and things like that. So that's my reading story. And then reading also became something of an escape over time as things with my family got a little bit difficult. You know, I would bury my face in a book, and that's kind of how I would deal with the world. There would be times when, even if we were walking on the street, I would have a book and I'd be holding it in front of my face, because it was a way to escape for me. And it was also a tool for that for a very long time. And I could see ways in which it was also not healthy, but it was also a coping mechanism, and it got me through, and I grew into a more healthy place with that. So, yeah, I mean, all of those things bundled together are my reading origin story. There's no real one thing that did it. Like, I can't point to like a Spider-Man getting bitten by a radioactive spider or anything like that. But those are all of the things that came together to make me a reader. We're getting a little long, so we're gonna do a couple more, and then we'll stop for this video. Hedgie CC says, what was your first job in a bookstore? How did you get it? How did working in a bookstore influence your reading? My first job was actually not in a bookstore. My first job was actually in a gym. I worked there part-time after school when I was in high school. It started when I was 13. So after my parents divorced, My father stayed in San Francisco, and my sisters and I moved to Long Island with my mother to be closer to family. But during the summer, we would go stay with my father, and he had a friend who had been a personal trainer and opened his own gym. And the year he opened it, he asked my father he had just opened it when we arrived in California, and he asked my father if I would help him out with some chores, and my father made me do it. And actually, it's probably one of the best things my father ever did, because I was a really shy, insecure child, and being in that environment challenged me in a lot of ways. Like, I was too afraid to change the water bottle on the water dispenser, and it kind of forced me to do things like that and realize that I was capable of doing things like that. But that was my first job. And then when we moved from Long Island to live with my father in San Francisco, and I started going to school there, I would go to that gym after school and work for an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, whenever I was done. And if I had vacation, I was usually working at the gym. And then when I graduated, I didn't want to go to school, and my father got a job back on the East Coast, so I moved with him. And I had it in my head that I wanted to work in a bookstore because I just wanted to be around books, and I liked spending time in bookstores. So I applied at both Borders and Barnes & Noble. And Borders actually immediately interviewed me. And I'm a terrible job interview, and I was even back then. But Borders immediately interviewed me, and within a day or two offered me a job. And I was friends for a while with the person who had hired me, and he said that I was a terrible interview and I was really painfully shy, but he could tell I really was interested in books, and he had a feeling, I don't know what, it gave him the impression that I would work hard, and I did. So that's how I ended up working there. Barnes & Noble actually called me the day after I was offered the job at Borders to do an interview, and I fully admit, because I had already been hired at Borders, my father encouraged me to do it because he was in that businessman mindset where he was like, go there, and if you get a better offer, you can leverage it against Borders. But that's not how entry-level retail jobs work, but bless his heart. Anyway, so I went out. I kind of just didn't care about the interview at Barnes & Noble. I showed up in a t-shirt, and they did offer me the job, and I pretended that in the meantime I had gotten an offer from Borders. So I just let it go. But that's how I ended up working at Borders. And how did it influence my reading? Well, I already read a lot. I think it introduced me to a lot of the newer books and the idea of publishing, because I was, especially in high school, you tend to read older books that are already established. So that was what I knew. And so the whole culture of newer books and new releases that were coming out, it introduced me to that, which gave me a path to working in publishing later, which I eventually left. And I really was just interested in knowing what was new, what was coming, and what people were liking and other people were reading. So it exposed me to a lot of titles that I probably would not have discovered on my own. And of course, having a discount added to my TBR. When I did my bookshelf tour, there were a lot of books that I have had for about 20 years. That's because I had a discount 20 years ago when I was working at Borders, and I've had those books ever since. And working at Borders definitely, and having the conversations with customers and other employees, put books in front of me that I otherwise wouldn't. And that's why I like Booktube, because it fills that gap for me now when I'm not working in publishing and not working in a bookstore. So let's see. Don Levy says, do you have a favorite LGBT film based on a book, and you don't have a real fireplace in Montana? I would think you would need one. So our fireplace it is a real fireplace, but when we did our home inspection on this, what they found was that it's pretty shallow. So if we use it as a real fireplace, we're going to smoke out the living room where I'm sitting right now. So basically, it is a real fireplace. It's technically operable, but we don't want to smoke out the house, so we don't use it as a fireplace, which is why we created that stained glass of a fire that we sit in front of it. Technically, yeah, you would need a fireplace here in Montana, but we have heating. You could probably hear it clicking in the background in any of the videos that I do during the winter months. So yeah, and actually that is one of the interesting things, because when I first moved to Montana, the one thing people kept saying over and over and over again was City Boy is not going to be ready for Montana winters. Well, not true. Because let me tell you something, if you have ever waited over an hour on a New York City subway platform in below zero weather for a train that's not coming, you're ready for anything. So the winters here have not been that much of a problem at the end of the day anyway. As for a favorite LGBT film based on a book, I'm tempted to say Brokeback Mountain, because that is a really interesting adaptation because it is based on a short story. And I feel like when they adapted it, they did a really great job fleshing it out so that everything they add feels like it feels at home in the original story. It genuinely feels like an expanded version of it. It doesn't feel like they've added things or twisted things or changed things. It all feels like organic growths out of that source material. But I haven't watched Brokeback Mountain in a long time because obviously it's sad. I'm also tempted to say Maurice because it's one of my favorite books, and there is a good adaptation with Hugh Grant does not play Maurice, which I think is, somebody pointed out that it's pronounced Morris in the UK, and I will never be able to wrap my head around that. But Hugh Grant does not play the title character. Let's go with that. He plays somebody else, but he's in it, and it's a great adaptation. I want to say Merchant and Ivory did it, but I could be wrong about that. It's a beautiful adaptation, but I'm going to go with Call Me By Your Name. I think it's a really good adaptation, and I think one of the things that's really good, successful about it is that usually when you adapt, you have to add some kind of either narration or some way to get the subtext of it. Call Me By Your Name resists all of that. It does not engage. It does not have any kind of narration, and yet you can pick up on all of the emotions that are going on inside the characters and what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I think that's one of the things that makes it a really successful adaptation of a book. It gets at everything that's going on, because one of the things that makes it difficult to adapt is that you really can't in a book you can show what somebody's thinking or what's going on underneath the surface, and it's really hard to do that in a movie without adding voiceover narration. And I think Call Me By Your Name does a really great job with that. It's also a beautiful movie. I know a lot of people have trouble with the age difference between the characters, but I'm a fan of the book, and I thought the movie was extremely well done. So I'm going to go with that. And I have a couple of other questions, but I'm going to skip 3 questions ahead to Lonesome Dove Call, because I had specifically grabbed something to answer theirs, and I don't want to take the time to get to 3 questions before I get to that. I do want to answer their question. So Lonesome Dove Call says, I have a bookish type question for you. In most of your older videos, located behind you on the bookshelves, the Spider-Man Pez dispenser is sitting on what I think is a tiny book. I've always wondered what that little book is, since it appears to be in a slipcase. Can you show us that little book? Because I'm dying of curiosity. Happy reading, Valerie. Well, here it is. It's Marriage, the Great Gift by Helen Exley. This was kind of a gag gift that was given to me on my wedding day by my husband's cousin Jamie. She said, "This is so you know how to take care of my cousin," and I've always kept it as a memento of that. But that's what it is. Basically, here's the perfect gift for the one you love, the person you've chosen to be with for the rest of your life. More than 200 of the most wonderful things ever written about marriage and being in love. Enjoy. And I'll give you a little bit of a sample. Okay. When we first met, we were 2 people who loved each other. Now we are 1 person, 2 lives, inextricably entwined and held by love. Peter Gray. Or, marriage is the fusion of 2 hearts, the union of 2 lives, the coming together of 2 tributaries. Peter Marshall. And that is the little book. Incidentally, so the reason that they were stacked like that is because I've mentioned in some videos recently that Larry Kramer has a book that I really want to read, and the title of it is a gay slur, and that title was plainly visible over my shoulder whenever I was sitting in front of my bookcases at the time. Now I've added another bookshelf and everything is rearranged so that book wouldn't be in that exact spot. But it felt weird having that word over my shoulder, so I arranged this and then the Spider-Man Pez dispenser on top of it to block out the title, and that is why. But yeah, so that is the book right there. I will get to the 3 questions that would have come before Lonesome Dove Calls in the next video. And like I said, if you have other questions that you want to add, if there's anything I've mentioned in this video that you would like further elaboration, further I have a question about, basically. I will link the Q&A announcement video down below. Please follow the link to that video and ask a question there, because it'll make things easier for me. I'll only have to look for questions in one place. And thank you for your time. I'll be back to do another part of this. I'm sorry, part 2 got delayed. Hopefully you understand. August ended up being kind of a dumpster fire of a month. Hopefully September is going to be better, and we can all look forward to that, I hope. Anyway, I'll get to part 3 soon. Thank you again for everyone who asked a question, and thank you to everyone who has watched, especially if you've made it this far into this video. I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.